How did a simple idea to please the customer and make sure they get the best deal on every item become a multi-billion-dollar behemoth? And in its last fiscal year, it did over $500 billion in sales, and also the largest private employer of labor worldwide. Let's go all the way back to how it began. After graduating from college in 1940, young Sam Walton decided to pick up an offer with JCPenney, and this was where he fell in love with retailing. He did 18 months on the job. The war was on at the time, and he decided he had to go see some action for himself. And when he was rounding up in 1945, he was sure he was going into the business of retailing, and he was going into the business for himself. So he went to the local library and he read all he could find on the subject of retailing. Then he had to decide how he was going to set up and where he was going to set up. He was married at the time, and the wife grew up in a small town, so she intended to raise a family in a small town. So she sat him down and said, "Look, Sam, I'll move with you anywhere, as long as you're not asking me to move into a big city." A big city to her was any town that was more than a population of 10,000 people. And this later became a strategy for Walmart expansion. This afforded him the opportunity to see firsthand the type of sales that was possible in a population of less than 10,000 people. They took all they had at the time, which was about $5,000, and took a $20,000 loan from his father-in-law. With that, he got a new port location under the Ben Franklin franchise, which was a struggling variety store that the owner was so desperate to sell. Newport, Arkansas was a town of about 7,000 people. It was after I closed the deal he knew the details of what he was getting into. The store only did about $72,000 a year in sales, and it paid about 5% in rent. To make matters worse, there was a competition on the corner to the store. Although much smaller to the store he was buying, the competition did about $150,000 a year in sales. And on September 1st, 1945, 27-year-old Sam Walton became a variety store owner in Newport, Arkansas. Starting the Ben Franklin franchise helped him learn a lot about accounting, about expenses, about profit and loss, and every other details he ought to know about making his business a success. One thing Sam Walton realized early in life was the fact that he could learn from just anybody, and he made sure to learn a lot from his competitors. He believed in looking at what others are doing well and improve upon it and look for ways to make it better. So he would go into his competitor's store and spend hours and hours there. He will look at his pricing, he will look at his arrangement, he will look at everything he has going on, just to get ways to make his own store better. In fact, in those early days, he spent more time in his competitor's store than he did in his own store. And this taught him so much about how to set up for success. He was always on the lookout for what his competitor was doing well and asking himself how he could do it better. After 2.5 years of operation, he was able to pay back the $20,000 loan he took from his father-in-law. In its first year of operation, the store did about $105,000 in sales. The following year, it did about $140,000 in sales. And then the year after that, it did $175,000 in sales. And within 5 years, the store was doing about $250,000 in sales annually. All this activity was beginning to gain attention, especially that of the landlord. Sam had neglected a clause in the lease agreement that gave him an option to renew the lease after the first 5 years. And the landlord capitalized on this, so he wouldn't let him renew at any price at all, as he wanted to give the store to his son. So Sam was being chased out of town, literally. Now he was 32, a full-fledged merchant, and at least he knows what he's doing now. He saw the setback as a chance to start all over again. took all he had at the time, which was about more than $50,000. He got a new variety store in Bentonville, a small town northwest of Arkansas, with a population of about 3,000 people, and he was back in business again. Only this time he made sure to read the lease agreement properly. The store did about $32,000 in sales in its first year, and by 1952 he opened another store. The store did about $90,000 in sales, while that of Bentonville did $95,000 in its second year. He kept reinvesting all the money he made back into opening new stores. He brought in his brother to partner at some point, and he usually let his managers invest in the new stores. By 1960, he was running 15 stores, and they were doing about $1.4 million in sales annually. Around that time, the concept of discounting was catching on. Bigger stores, cheaper prices, and the volume makes up the profit, and he decided to look thoroughly into it. A competitor had opened one of the discount store franchise close to one of Sam's variety stores, and he knew how badly they did compared to the competition. So he knew he had to act, as variety stores would be a thing of the past. He tried to partner with other players in the industry, but nobody saw what he was saying. On July 2nd, 1962, the first Walmart opened, which was about 17 years after Sam Walton decided to go into the business of retailing. In its first year, the store did about $1 million in sales. They ran the store for 2 years to be sure they knew what they were getting into before deciding to add more Walmart stores. Walmart's motto from day one was, "We sell for less, satisfaction guaranteed." They had a 30% margin on everything they sold, and this guarantees that whatever Walmart was selling, you can't find it cheaper elsewhere. By 1967, he had about 5 Walmart stores and about 14 variety stores. Altogether, they did about $9 million in sales that year. Compared to Kmart, which was the largest in the industry at the time, Kmart had about 250 discount stores, and they did about $800 million in sales that year. But Kmart wouldn't go into a city of population less than 50,000 people. And the second largest competition then was Gibson. But Gibson also wouldn't go into a town of population less than 10,000. So this left Sam and pockets of other guys to open up discount chains in those smaller towns. Having to bootstrap taught him how to become a lean operator, keeping his costs down and pass on the savings to customers. Another thing that made a number of his early employees committed to the success of Walmart was the fact that he had profit-sharing agreements in place for every store. So they had skin in the game from day one. And 19 years after leaving Newport, he went back over there to open the first discount store there. And the store did so well that the landlord's son had to close shop as he couldn't compete. Aside keeping costs low and trying to become the best operator he could be, he also did a lot of merchandising, always in search of the next bargain for the customer, and offering these bargains to customers as often as he could find them. This meant a flurry of activities in most of the Walmart stores. Realizing that customer obsession was the way to go, and giving the customer what they want, we always made them come back again. He kept checking on the competition and encouraging his staffs to do the same, to see what they were doing right and how they can improve on what the competition was doing right. Whenever he travels all around the world, he always makes sure to visit a store and see what he could bring back to please the customer. By 1970, he had about 32 stores, all doing about $31 million in sales annually. He gradually began phasing out the variety stores, and by 1972, Walmart had about 51 stores. Most of them were discount stores, and together they did about $78 million in sales that year. 2 years down the line, in 1974, he had about 78 stores, and they did about $168 million in sales that year. Fast track 2 years later, he had about 125 stores, all of them discount stores, and they did about $340 million in sales that year. Fast forward in 1980, Walmart had 276 stores, and together they did $1.2 billion in sales that year. Fast track to 1984, Walmart had about 640 stores, and they did a whopping $4.5 billion in sales. Fast track to 1990, Walmart had about 1,528 stores, and between them they did $26 billion in sales and a profit of $1 billion. Today, Walmart is the largest company in terms of revenue globally, and it has over 10,000 stores under various subsidiaries in various countries around the world, touching lives in various ways.